Okay, well, hello. I thought this would take me much longer, but anyway, at least I got somewhere, so I have something I can finally do. Um, I'm glad I did this though, because there's a lot of parallel here once you get to these sections. Like First Samuel is its own thing, and then Second Samuel mostly runs along with First Chronicles, and then First and Second Kings runs along with Second Chronicles, and so it's an overlap. And there'll be some details in this one and other details in the other one because they included different things. I mean, Kings includes more prophets, stuff about the prophets, and Chronicles is just about the kings. Mostly, there are exceptions, but mostly. So, then Chronicles has a lot of details about articles of the temple and that kind of thing, duties. So, it's just the same thing as the Gospels. They're different accounts by different people that um, evaluate different things from different angles, and that's okay. I mean, it doesn't mean there's some contradiction because they're not identical. So it's just analyzing it from a different standpoint for a different reason, looking at different things. Uh, you know, one is doing this historical account and one is looking at that thing more, and that's okay. So anyway, so Second Samuel goes on with David. So there's a lot about David that's going to come up here. Um, some of this again. Oh, and there's a lot of repeat. So I'll mention that. So I again won't go over like every chapter either, but just certain things. So Second Samuel 2 verse 4. So here's where David, he's a grown man. He was already anointed as a young lad as king by Samuel, but now he's a man and he's being anointed again. So then the men of Judah came in verse 4, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they said to David, and they told David, saying, the men of Jabesh Gilead were the ones who buried Saul. Okay, that's something else. But so it's just mentioning he was anointed. And let me see, there's more over here. Let me see. 5. Yeah, here's some more detail. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Also, in time past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over Israel. Therefore, all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. So here's what this means. Okay, what happened was somewhere right in this time, the kingdom of Israel split into two. So there was Judah in the south and what was called Israel in the north. And so David first technically became king over Judah and was there for 7 years and a half. And then the rest of them came to him and said, we want you king over us too. So he was king over Israel, the other section, for 33 years. So that means in Judah it was really 40 years. See, so he was 40 years there and 33 years in the other place, but it was 7 years when they came and made him their king too. So he was king over all of Israel for 33 years, but 40 years over just Judah. See, so yeah, it gets that way. But okay. Anyway, he was king for a long time. And then what happened was it was one kingdom for a while. Oh, and in 1 Chronicles 11, 1-3, it also mentions this thing. Let me go there real quick. 1 Chronicles 11. 1-3. See, it's the same. It's the same thing, only they don't include as much detail, actually. So I'm not gonna read that part, but it's the same thing. See, so they run parallel is what's happening here. Now, I just wanted to read all this so that I had one account to give and not have to repeat it in two different ways, here and there again. So that's why it took a few days just to do all that. So anyway, all right. So this is what happens. He becomes king, like it says, over Israel, and then there are a lot of chapters in there where there's repetition of what happened before, but this is still a time of a lot of war while David is in, before he really reigns, and during the time he reigns as well. There are a lot of wars, all right, surrounding nations and stuff, and it's they attack Israel. Typically, that's what it is all the time, really, but they attack them. So, and God kind of brings it about, like then there's an occasion, and then they go out and defend themselves and retaliate, and then they win and they gain, and that's just how it goes on. So, but anyway, there are a lot of stories in there, all kinds of things where, I don't know, reading it today, people might wonder, like, why did they do that, Anyway, but it is what it is, and there's a lot of, bloodshed and strife and different things. So anyway, a lot of chapters are about that. So I'm not going to get into all that. I mean, I always tell people, you read the Bible, all of it for yourself from cover to cover. But you don't need me to, go over all that. So anyway, now in 2 Samuel 5 and 1 Chronicles 14, it mentions, then David starts getting wives and he starts getting children, and then he gets more wives and more children. So he has a lot of offspring, and unfortunately, well, this comes up after the other thing, so I'll get there. But then we have a lot of, again, conquests, victories, details of battles, and that goes on and on. Most of it is that, most of it, but there are exceptions here. He has a thing. I'll read this one over here. It's pretty interesting. Over in 2 Samuel, I have again select things I'll read for a reason, and just to talk about that. This one, okay, so I have to give a little background here. Saul was king first, and then he got the boot, and then David was king, and Saul, he died with his sons in battle, and then David became officially king right after that. So that's the part I read, but he Saul, for some reason, and I mentioned that it's a type as well, but Saul always had it out for David. He was jealous, he was paranoid, and David didn't have anything out for Saul. Like, he wasn't trying to hurt him at all. But David had to be in hiding a lot because of Saul thinking all this and going after David, trying to kill David. So there are a lot of things about that, him hiding and this and that. So there's a lot of that. And so what happens is David and Saul's son, Jonathan, they become good buddies. So they're like best friends. And even though, so it's funny, of course, Saul is an arch enemy and Jonathan, they're like best friends. So then, so that's great. But then Jonathan has a son, and his name, oh, well, you'll see it as one of those names, but it's an interesting story. So I just wanted to give that background before I read this. Okay, so now at this point, Saul is dead, David is king, and here, this guy's name is Mephibosheth, and well, there's a funny little story I'll tell you after this, but I'll read the chapter first. Okay, so chapter 9, it's 2 Samuel chapter 9. Now, David said, "Is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" So he's trying to do good for descendants of Saul for Jonathan's sake, the best friend. And David has a habit of this kind of thing. I mean, you could say he did well at loving his enemies, but sometimes it went in a direction that almost did more harm than good, in a way. But in another way, there's so many things that were just so tragic. Family members and things, it's just tragic. And it goes on that way. But so, yeah, it's pretty depressing, honestly. But anyway, he does seem to have that kind of a heart in him to, love people anyway, that kind of thing. So here he is trying to love the descendants of Saul, mainly for Jonathan's sake. So that's what he's trying to do here. So, and there was a servant of the house of Saul, whose name was Ziba. So when they had called him to David, the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" He said, "At your service." Then the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" So, see, I mean, he was being really nice here, kind and forgiving and all that. And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." So the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-debar. Now, when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, "Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "Here is your servant." So David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." Then he bowed himself and said, "What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Michah, and all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet. Okay, so that was very nice of David. He did this. Now, somewhere else it mentions this. What happened to him was this. He was at home as a baby or a young toddler, something like that. And they had nurses, or almost like a nanny today. So he had a nanny. And something happened. Either a war broke out. It was one of those tragedy things. And she tried to grab him and run. And somehow she dropped him and he landed on his feet. So he ended up, his feet got crippled as a result of that. That's why he had that foot problem and he was lame in his feet. So that's what happened to him. But other than that, he was all right. But so this is the deal here. And then there was something that comes up later that I have to explain it. Then Saul had he had Jonathan and he had other sons. And you would think that somebody with a name like Mephibosheth, that there could only be one guy with this name, right? These names they had back then. But so this is the funny story now. I was sitting in church one day, and the pastor happened to be in that part of the Bible where he had gone over this, and then not too much later, he went over the story it was another story, and there was a guy in there named Mephibosheth, and he thought it was this Mephibosheth and some kind of judgment. I forgot if it was from David's end or somebody's end, right? Who came upon a certain group of people, and this other Mephibosheth guy was mentioned in the list of names. And, he had this look on his face like, well, first he gets all this blessing, and next thing you know, he gets some kind of a judgment, I don't know. They put them to death all the time back then. But so it was something like this, and it was just this look he had like, well, who knows? It was the Old Testament, right? I mean, I still laugh about it today, thinking about it. And then I thought, wait a minute, So when I hadn't read it then for a little while, and then I forgot. And then I read it again, and it turned out, I found out it was a different Mephibosheth. Saul, had a lot of sons too, and he had a son by that name. And then, he had a grandson through another son by that name. Jonathan, was a son, and his son was Mephibosheth. But then Saul had a son named Mephibosheth. So, different guy, different fate, for a different reason. So some judgment came on him for something else. And that's what it was, But there was a lot of bloodshed back then, that's a fact. But But he had this wrong. Like, these are two different Mephibosheths. And, that's what happens when you don't give it a careful reading and you just do a cavalier, quick, casual read, and you see a name like this and you think, oh, that guy. There can only be one guy with a name like that, right? Psst, wrong. Nope, there were two of them, two different guys. So that made it all make so much more sense when you knew that. Like, okay, now the story makes at least more sense than it otherwise would. So, okay. But it was funny in that way, but it was also kind of an eye opener. Like, they don't really do very much of their homework, and I could talk about that for quite a while, but you get the idea. So, anyway, it's very important, to look at the details here. And okay, so that's the story with him. So, it's just a little picture into the window into the heart of David. So that was nice. Okay, now, next thing that happens, he gets excited he wants to build the house of God, David, but God tells him that, and this is a fact, like he has shed a lot of blood in war, and I mean, it was supposed to happen in a way, right? But like in another way, God was like, yeah, okay, but I'm going to have your son build the temple because he's not going to have to deal with all that stuff. So David wants to build a house of God, but it's his son Solomon who ends up building it. So that'll come up later. But in the meantime, David brings the Ark of the Covenant to the tabernacle, which is still there. And it used to be in Shiloh for the beginning. Then all that happened with Eli and the sons. So the ark got moved to this place called Kirjath Jearim. And it was there for a while, but the whole thing was dormant. Nothing was really happening. And then David brought it to Jerusalem and put it in the tabernacle, and they set it all up that way. And the ministry resumed at that point with the Levites and everything. But later it goes into the temple. But finding out there were so many things, even I forgot, but they had gone long periods of time without, when you read all this, okay, you're supposed to have a Passover every year, the Feast of Tabernacles, this, that, the other thing, and they didn't, I thought they would be doing this every year, at least, well, they had hardly done it. I mean, it was just here and there once in a while, and then they had left this all dormant for so long. And then with certain kings under them, they had it going on, but usually not, because most of these kings were really bad. So I'll get to that. But anyway, it was a shock, to see how little actually happened. But okay, the Ark of the Covenant gets brought there. That's what David does. And he gets a lot of supplies ready for the building of the temple. So this is in 1 Chronicles 13, 15, and 16. Again, it's not mentioned in Samuel. It's mentioned over there. Then we have this story that comes up next. Oh, and the preparations for the building of the temple is in 1 Chronicles 22, where that's mentioned. And there are lists, long lists of this supply and those supplies and wood and gold and this and that. So their whole chapter is just full of these kinds of details about supplies and what the Levites are going to do again, or what their genealogy was. I mean, it's a lot of this sort of detail. So, okay, now the next chapter I'll read is there are two chapters here. We have or I should make this a separate video. Yes. Yeah. Okay. This will be a little shorter, and then okay, I'll be right back.